There are two types of voluntary Form 8Ks. You can furnish a voluntary Form K for Reg FD purposes with the SEC, or you can file a voluntary Form K to officially get that information in your SEC reporting stream. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of you. So companies file or furnish voluntary Form 8Ks all the time. They do this for a variety of reasons. They want to get the disclosure out there into the public domain to cut off any risk of illegal insider trading by those that possess material non-public information, or perhaps they have a duty to disclose because the company is engaged or is about to be engaged in repurchasing its stock, doing a stock buyback program. They want to inform the market of a development about something they've already publicly disclosed perhaps. Perhaps they have a duty to update, or maybe it's a duty to correct if the information that they initially disclosed to the public wasn't quite accurate. Ooh. Or maybe the company just wants the information out there for the general public to know for whatever reason. When a company files a voluntary Form 8K, it does not need to disclose the reason why it's making the disclosure. They don't have to say why. It's not required. So as I mentioned, there are two types of voluntary Form 8Ks, one that gets furnished to the SEC and then one that gets filed. And I have a separate Vid-Guide explaining the difference between furnished and filed, the link to which is below. But the upshot is that mechanically they're the same. You Edgarize your Form 8K and you're going to file it with the SEC in terms of mechanically. You're filing. It's up there in the SEC's Edgar database on the SEC's website. But for liability purposes, there's a difference. Furnished 8K has less potential liability than a filed one. You don't have Section 18 liability under the Exchange Act for a furnished 8K. So see that Vid-Guide for more gloss here. Just because you file a voluntary Form 8K, that's not an admission of materiality for the disclosure included in the 8K. You're not indicating to the market that you're saying that this information is material. It might be material, and it probably is, but it might not be. In fact, there's quite a few 8Ks that get filed where the information disclosed just simply is not material. It's clear on its face. Companies just want that information that they disclose out there for whatever reason they have. So General Instruction B6 of Form 8K specifically provides that a voluntary Form 8K, regardless if it's furnished or filed under Item 701 or 801, and we're about to talk about the difference between those two, it's not deemed an admission as to the materiality of the disclosure per that general instruction. So the furnished 8K is one that you make under 7.01 of Form 8K. Item 7.01 is for Regulation FD disclosures. You use that type of 8K to satisfy the public dissemination requirement for information required to be publicly disclosed under Regulation FD. All of the exhibits to an Item 701 8K are also deemed to be furnished, not filed. The deadlines for an Item 701 8K is a deadline imposed by Reg FD. After all, you're using this item to make a Reg FD disclosure. So it's going to depend on whether you're making something publicly disseminated for Reg FD purposes because you want it out there before you're about to make a Reg FD broad non-exclusory disclosure, or perhaps one of your people, one of your officials made a slip up, intentional or not, and you need to get the information out there pretty fast. So the deadline's going to vary depending on your Reg FD situation here, your scenario. General Instruction B2 to Form 8K provides that information furnished in an Item 701 8K will not be subject to liability under the Exchange Act Section 18, and the information will not be subject to an automatic incorporation by reference into the company's Securities Act registration statements. That's a big deal. It will not assume Section 11 liability under the 33 Act. That's strict liability. Unless the company takes affirmative steps to include that disclosure in a periodic report, proxy statement, or registration statement, that's not likely to happen that you're going to do that, because if you wanted to do that, you would file an Item 801 8K. So an Item 801 8K is that other type of voluntary 8K, and this one is considered filed. And you use an Item 801 8K to make that disclosure part of your SEC reporting stream so that it is incorporated by reference into your periodic reports, proxy statements, or 33 Act registration statement. Obviously, the exhibits for an 801 8K are also considered filed, and this incorporation by reference of the disclosure in the exhibits happens automatically. Companies don't have to make any special disclosures, take any actions to make that happen. It happens by rote of law. Note that you can use an Item 801 8K rather than a 701 to make information publicly disseminated under Reg FD for Reg FD purposes if you want that information in your SEC reporting stream too. You're not forced to use 701 for FD purposes if you want that information considered filed, not furnished. One last thing to note, filing a voluntary Form 8K late, regardless if it's a 701 or 801 8K, doesn't impact a company's Form S3 eligibility. That's because these 8Ks are voluntary. Anyways, let me know what you think.